Shana Tova and Gemar Chatima Tova, and thank you for joining us in this very important last few hours before Neilah, before the gates close, our last time to offer our urgent prayers to God. And in this moment, we wanted to just take some time and think about the very end of Yom Kippur, the last page of the Machzor, because the ends are very important. And Micha Goodman has talked about this over the years, which is how something ends says a lot about the whole book. For example, when the Torah ends with the death of Moses on the wrong side of the River Jordan, that says a lot about the human condition, that all of us have the River Jordan we can't cross, and all of us have the promised land we can't enter, and that it's about the striving and the searching and the seeking, even if we don't fulfill those dreams. That's how the Torah ends, and that says a lot about the Torah's message. What about the Machzor? So the Machzor has a very particular, very distinctive end. Just to refresh, for those of you who might not have been to Neilah recently, and those of you who have been to Neilah will know this very distinctive end. It ends with Elias in our sanctuary, or Eliza in the Gant Chapel, or outside this year, saying Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad once, and then we repeat. The congregation repeats, and then Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed 3 times, and then we repeat, and then it ends with the last spoken word before the Tekiyah Gedolah is Adonai Hu Elohim. The Lord, He is God. The Lord is God. Adonai Hu Elohim 7 times. Adonai Hu Elohim, Adonai Hu Elohim, Adonai Hu Elohim times 7. And then Tekiyah Gedolah. So if endings matter, and if endings say a lot about the whole project, the first question is, what's with this end? This last page of the Machzor, with the repetition once, and the repetition 3 times, the repetition 7 times before the Tekiyah Gedolah, what does that all mean? Dan?
Yeah, I was thinking about numbers. So when we have 7, and then the Shema once, and Baruch Shem Kavod. So what does that add up to, right? And it adds up to 11, right? If my math is correct. And I was thinking about that in relation to, there's a moment in the Torah, it says Lanu Ulevanenu Ad Olam, and there are dots over over 11 of those letters. And how do the rabbis interpret that? What is that number 11, and how important that is? And this is, I think that Adonai Hu Elohim repeated 7 times, creating this kind of energy, is a moment that's nistarot. It's something that's hidden, that only God understands, and that the power of the repetition brings us in an emotional state that's closer to God, but yet not quite there. And it also closes with the idea that we always, even at the end of Neilah, that we still have work to do.
So thank you, Dan, for that. A couple of little things. I have a few sources here. I did my research. So the tradition of doing these verses started in Germany in the 11th century. Okay, and actually the tradition of blowing the shofar in the high holidays is from the 9th century. A couple of things that I read that I like, and they seem very interesting to me. The only day during the year that we say Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed out loud is Yom Kippur. All right? So it's very meaningful to end the Neilah service with that line.
Time out. For those at home, that means praised be the name of the one whose glorious sovereignty is forever and ever. Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. And that's what we say out loud only on Yom Kippur.
Right,
and 3
because
times.
as you remember, that line is always in smaller font when you say between the Shema line and Be'afta. Okay, so normally during the year, it says silently or something like that. I don't know exactly what the Siddur says. During Yom Kippur, not even in Rosh Hashanah, only in Yom Kippur, after the Shema in the evening, in the Kol Nidrei, or Yom Kippur day in the morning, we say it out loud. Now, there are different traditions as well that not always they have done 1, 3, 7. There are still many traditions do 3, 3, and 3. The 3 comes from different sources. One of them could be that God, Adonai, is always with us. So it reminds us the verse, Adonai Malach, Adonai Melech, Adonai Imloch, Leolam Baed, the 3 tense, past, present, and future. And the 7 is something that it's complete. 7 days of creation, 7 aliyot to the Torah. And there are many other times, we were talking this before, that in the liturgy we have to repeat certain prayers. Yesterday night, we did Kol Nidre 3 times. In the morning, we say Adonai, Adonai when we take out the Torah 3 times. There are many, many times where we do the repetitions, and that could be one explanation about why the numbers.
Yeah, I love that, Elias. And I also note the parallel to Vehu Haya, Vehu Hoveh, Vehu Yeh, and really thinking about the fullness of God's presence. Also in Talmudic parlance, when you do something 3 times, that's a chazaka. That means that you actually mean it, and we mean it this time. And one of my favorite midrashim ever about the Baruch Shem is when we say Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, that's not just a faith statement for our people, but it's actually a family story too of Jacob's children gathered around his bedside saying, listen, Dad, listen, Israel, right? We get it. God is our God too, and we're going to hold on to your legacy. And then Jacob responds, Baruch Shem Kevod, like thank God, yes, right? They get it. And in a sense, if we're repeating in this final moment, if we're repeating this sense of we get it, we understand what all this day has been about. We take on those obligations of our ancestors and we carry them forward in our lives. And we're so grateful for the opportunity, Lador Vador, to really take this on as a chazaka for the Jewish people.
So far, all of you have talked about the meaning of the numbers and the meaning of the words and putting it in a larger midrashic tradition. I'd like to ask you to think about the actual experience at the moment of, right? The shofar blows, we're going to blow the shofar at 7:40. So we're saying this at 7:38, 7:39. It's, in pre-pandemic times, the sanctuary is full. It's going to be less full, obviously, in the pandemic, but you have a lot of people and a lot of energy and a lot of intensity. Could you say a word about the lived life of somebody who's saying this, the lived life of a congregation who's saying this together? And maybe, Lisa, can I ask you, what it's like for you as the Chazan when you're leading it? What are you thinking, and how does it make you feel when you do this?
So, in the chapel or outside this year, we do a practice that I learned growing up of zikr, which is an imported Eastern tradition of repeating a short phrase over and over and over again. And when I was growing up, I remember this distinctly. We would all gather in the mountains of Colorado and we would chant, Yahu Elohim, Yahu Elohim. And you do it long enough, and the inner experience is you start to lose yourself in those words, that the power of the rhythm and the power of the syllables and the power of the text sort of takes over. And by that point, right, we're already hungry, but you get to be so much more hungry, so much more thirsty, like your body is already ready to go into this other state. And so we'll chant for a while, and then I'll start and I will just hold up fingers. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And at that point, Tekiah Gadola, it's the gates. I mean, you really feel everything comes home. You feel an emotional transformation. You feel that moment that we made it, that the one takeaway we have to have is we're not in this alone. God is with us. God's going to carry us through this next year.
Now, is that effective for you?
For me, highly effective. For me, it feels transformative. It feels like the words have power.
So how does it compare, Lisa, for you personally, to, let's say, a regular Shabbat Alive song service where you're singing beautiful melodies? How do you compare the prayer experience of Adonai Elohim 7 times, etc., with singing L'Chadodi or some other beautiful tune or any other basic prayer experience? And if it's so effective, why do we only do it once?
So in our house, we've been watching a lot of the U.S. Open. My husband loves tennis. And if you watch people at the U.S. Open, there's like silence, 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 and then like screaming, yes! And the things that people will say, like, you did a great job, or you did a great thing, we say all the time to each other, right? Like, you did a great job, you did a wonderful thing, but there's a difference when you were screaming it at the side of a court. Great job! It just has more intensity, it has more feeling. And so, to me, the moment at the end of Neilah is like the biggest sports match of our life, that we are shouting out these cheers, that we all get caught up in the match of our lives. We're all caught up in the scene, and we know that we've brought it home. We brought that point home, and we've won. And you can't have that every day and every moment. And music is lovely, and music has the power to bring us new places, and compliments and good words bring us places. But it's really different than like the moment of elation when you just everything is right.
Elias?
So a couple of things to talk about that. Two things. For me, Neilah brings back memories of my childhood. When I was growing up in Argentina, I don't think you've ever done it here in America, correct me if I'm wrong, but in Argentina, all the construction is brick, so there are no problems with fire. So Neilah, kids will come with a candle. Lighting, they will do a lineup with a candle coming into the bima. Super powerful. I was one of those kids, and it was always so meaningful. And to me, Adonai Hu Elohim, we say it in a different way every Shabbat. Every Shabbat we end, the last 3 words we say on Shabbat is Adonai li velo ira. God is with me. I won't be having fear, or I won't be afraid. All right? And so I don't think that we say, you asked before, why we do only once a year. The power of the words is a little different. They're in Yadon Olam as well every Shabbat.
Okay. I just want to ask to bring one aspect that we haven't talked about yet, which is actually the tune, the melody, the nigun with which you sing these words. And could you talk about how the form of the melody converges with the meaning of the words? How do you sing it, and what does it mean?
Yeah, quickly. When we sing traditionally, with the way we sing Shema and Echad during the high holidays, has a different melody. Normally we sing Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu, and in Rosh Hashanah we sing Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu. That has to do obviously with the nusach. The purpose of the nusach is to show musically the different times that happen during the year. When we reach Adonai Hu Elohim, it's a different type of melody. And we were joking that it's kind of boring.
So
there
boring.
are many different traditions. I like to use the one that the great Louis Lewandowski, a German composer in the 19th century, wrote, which starts in what is called a minor melody, and the last one of the 7th ends in a major key. 2 things. Each one of the 7 sound a little different, okay? And the 7th one specifically goes to a major key. Usually major keys are saved for announcing moments that are important in the liturgy, and that is the way it ends. And I like that. It's a beautiful tradition.
So could you just do the last few of those?
Yeah, so normally we do Adonai Hu Elohim, repeat that, and then Adonai Hu Elohim, and then the last one is Adonai Hu Elohim, Adonai Hu Elohim. Technically speaking, it's half step higher than the other one, and it ends in major.
Wow. I used to have the blessing of spending every Neilah service with Joyce and Michael Bonin. And when Joyce would get up surrounded by children on our bima, all those kids with glow sticks, my breath would be taken away, because the way that she did that would build. So it'd start out really quiet, and then would build and build and build until by the end she was just belting that out. And there's so much drama and majesty and beauty, and you're really caught up in that feeling of moving upward. And I think the sense of Adonai Hu Elohim, that yes, God is our God. God is with us, and we can take that sense that together we have spent this day experiencing the God that we so rarely experience throughout our year, through our community, through our prayers, through our introspection, and we have found something that we can take with us as we walk out the door.
So, Michelle, let me ask you this question. I'd like to ask each of you to close this piece of the conversation with this question. It's Neilah. It's a few hours from now. It's 7:38, 7:39, 7:40, and you do the whole Adonai Hu Elohim 7 times in community with all these tunes and all the resonances of the different tunes, and then the shofar blowing, and then what's your hope for how people feel, and what's your hope for the afterglow for yourself and for our beloved members? How do you want life to be different for you? How do you want life to be different for them after they've had this, powerful, epiphanal kind of moment together?
I'd like to start, if you allow me. Different things, so many things that we take from that moment. Renewed hopes for the year that comes. That's one thing. The power of community, that we are all together, and what that can be the fuel to carry on. Children, you see children there, full of hope, full of hopes and new beginning and smiles and beautiful things. Those three they really work well for me.
Yeah, I'd like people to leave feeling, like you say, hopeful, but also uplifted, and in a certain way, there's a certain relief also at the end of the day. There's so much intensity that goes into
We can eat.
yeah. There's so much intensity that goes into, from the moment of the first recitation of Kol Nidre, all the way through to that moment. It just builds and it builds and ebbs and builds and ebbs and builds to such a crescendo moment that that there's also this sense of relief, but also like moving forward and just being like hopeful for the new year, and a sense that people were going to move forward to fulfill the obligations that they promised, at the beginning of Rosh Hashanah. I feel energized. I want to do this now because I have the energy to do it. I have the will to do it.
My Rebbe used to talk, Rav Zalman Schachter Shalom Alav Shalom, he used to talk about taking sweet memories and tucking them in your back pocket. So when you're waiting at the bank or you're sitting in traffic, you can pull them out. And my hope would be that everyone who's at this service has that inner sense of that emotional experience, the feeling of being heard, of singing our prayers out, of being here together. And that could be a force of strength and a force of goodness in the year to come.
And I just want to say amen to everything that each of you have said, energized, renewed, filled with purpose. Really, I hope when we say that God is God, right, what we're saying partially is we are not God. And we're also saying, and that means that God is in all of what we have seen and what we have experienced and what we have been partaking of this whole day, and that is in the faces of every person that we have prayed with. We said, Ashamnu, but God knew. We're part of something bigger than ourselves. And so my hope when I leave would be that I would be able to continue to see the face of God in the people I encounter all year long.
Okay, well, I just love everything you guys said. And now we got a real problem, and we have a real problem. I don't mean to be Debbie Downer. That's not my job. But I do want to bring some intellectual and spiritual integrity to this moment. Because, of course, who could argue with anything that any of you said about Adonai Hu Elohim? But there's a big problem, and it's one that we seldom think about. But Adonai Hu Elohim actually comes from a very specific place in the Bible. It comes from 1 Kings 18, verse 39, 1 Kings 18:39. And here's the story, and here's the problem, because all of the beautiful prayers, dreams, and aspirations that Elias and Dan and Michelle and Elisa just articulated all do not happen in the origin story of Adonai Elohim. So in short, what happens? The children of Israel are not following the real God. They're following the Canaanite god Baal. and they're forgetting about the God who took us out of Egypt, and they're worshiping false Canaanite deities. And the prophet Elijah sees this, and he says to the people, you got to choose. You're either going to choose the real God, or you're going to choose this Baal God, and I'm going to have a big contest, and you're going to see. And so what Elijah does is he gathers the people who are hopping between the two gods, to use his language, on the top of Mount Carmel. And he then gets 450 prophets from the false god Baal. These are false prophets of the false god. And he says, let's see whose God is really God. And he puts out an altar with a couple of bullocks on the altar, and he says, let's see which of our gods can get these bullocks consumed by fire without our using fire. So you do your thing. So the 450 false prophets take the 2 bullocks, they put them on the altar, they do their incantations, and no go. Nothing happens. Then Elijah takes the 2 bullocks, and he ramps up the degree of difficulty, puts all kinds of water, make it even harder, make it a wet bullocks, a wet altar, etc., and no matches. And he says, God, if you're the God, burn up these bullocks. And boom, boom, the fire comes down from heaven, and everybody sees this. Everybody sees this miracle, that the false Baal God couldn't do it, and the false prophets couldn't do it, but the real God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, could do it, and did it even with all the water, still did it. And they say, and it goes on, that, here we go, when they saw this, the miracle that Elijah wrought with God's help, all the people flung themselves on their faces and cried out, Adonai hu Elohim, Adonai hu Elohim. Okay? So far, so good, right? Okay. Now, here's what happens next. This part of the story never gets told, and I'll just read it. Then Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal, let not a single one of them get away. They seized them, 450 of them, and Elijah took them down to the Wadi Kishon and slaughtered them there. So Elijah kills 450 prophets, murder, after the people say Adonai hu Elohim, and guess what the people do? Nothing, zero, zip, zed, zelch. So they say Adonai hu Elohim, Adonai hu Elohim, Adonai hu Elohim, and murder on a massive scale, and the people do nothing. So what we have here is, when you look at the origin of this story, number one, Elijah's a violent vigilante. And by the way, this is not a funkadelic 21st century. I mean, God fires him in the next chapter, and that's when Elisha, who is the successor to Elijah, Elisha gets hired after this act. So God doesn't like it either. But more importantly, all the people of Israel who somehow got it now, and they see that Adonai hu Elohim, they do nothing. They do jack. They do nothing. They're just empty bystanders. They do nothing. And to me, a big problem that this raises is, what if, after all of this intensity, we're just the same person? What if it has no impact? What if it, like, we get chills in the moment? Like, wow, that's cool. I love the glow sticks, love the people, love the intensity. But what if we're the same person? So I guess my question is, how does the sordid origin of Adonai hu Elohim intersect with all these lofty prayers that you guys just mentioned?
So this is where I think is really interesting. The Adonai hu Elohim happens before the sordid destruction. Actually,
Correct.
That moment is just pure awe. That moment is everyone seeing the truth at once, everyone falling on their face, everyone having a communal moment. And so I think that there's a reason that we're frozen in time there on that mountain, and not afterwards. Like, the after is a cautionary tale, I think, but it's not like, that's not a guarantee.
Right, but it's a cautionary tale. But after they have this epiphany, here's the big problem with religion. What if it just makes you feel good inside? And what if it doesn't actually cause you to do anything outside to make a difference?
Well,
and here, all these people have this big moment, and then they actually see their leader commit a mass atrocity, and they do nothing. And so that, to me, that is a big problem.
But I actually think that happens all the time, and it happens in our world today. It's happening right now, where people's belief in God causes them to do things and to support things that really are anathema to God. And it's not that nothing happened to those people. As Elisa said, they had a real and complete transformation. They went from Baal to God. But they didn't know the rules of this God. That was in Elijah's hands to tell us, like help us understand who our God is. And the challenge is that the lesson then that
What
comes
about God
forward is
doesn't
that
like
our
murder?
well, right, but the lesson is that our God is a vigilante. Our God is a God of justice. Our God is a God who, by the way, right, if you commit idolatry, you will die. That's in there too, right? And so the emphasis on the vengeful God is actually not about the people who just transformed and said, God will be our God. That's about an interpretation of what it means to serve God that we're still struggling with in our world today, where people feel like God must be the one who has us commit acts of violence against each other.
In other words, are you suggesting, Michelle, that the reason they do nothing is not that they're indifferent and preoccupied and distracted, that the reason they do nothing is they actually think it's okay,
Yeah.
that if you don't follow the true God, you should get slaughtered?
And we see that, by the way, in our world today, that people are...
No, sorry. Did you finish?
I was just saying that people still hold fast to beliefs that they think are so strong and so important that you can commit violence in their name.
But before you go, Elias, if that's the case, if they do nothing because they actually think it's good, your reading is that what Elijah does is okay because God is vengeful. And
No,
what
I didn't say
no, but that's right. and that the people don't do anything because they think that what Elijah does is okay because God is vengeful. So then, what are we doing, bringing this phrase Adonai Elohim and this moment into our holiest space on the holiest day of the year? Isn't it like violent and bad? Why are we lifting it up?
I'm going to agree with Elisa here. The violence is what comes after, and as you point out, is corrected in the next chapter, where God actually takes the people and teaches them. Yes, you might have thought that that's what I wanted, and certainly there are lots of instances in history and in the Torah that you could see that face of God, but I want you to see a different face of God. And our whole story is about learning to see that different face of God that's about justice and righteousness and kindness. But the Jewish people, that's not our full story. And if we're honest at this moment, and at this moment we really should be honest, right? We do have a God that presents us with these options, and we're continually in the process of learning and growing. And what's so amazing about the moment that our people say Adonai Elohim is that they're open for all of it. They're ready to hear and to understand and to connect with the true God. And then it's our responsibility for the rest of the year to figure out what that is.
To me, there are two things that are troubling here. One is that what do we do with this idea that not only we bring up for the Yom Kippur the Adonai Elohim, but with the fact that week after week, when we finish the Abdallah, we sing Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Tishvi, Eliyahu Agildadi. How is it possible that a murderer, based on your words, it gets, sung and praised every single week? That's one thing. Maybe Dan can answer that. The second is that, unfortunately, it's not the only case in the Bible or in our liturgy where we highlight somebody who has committed horrible things. What do we do in Purim? We celebrate Esther and Mordechai, and we do this, and we eat wonderful food. And then chapter 10 comes, and we read it so quickly, so nobody will pay attention. The kids going back to sleep already because it's a day school. It's a night, that they have to go early to sleep. But what did Jews do once, Haman is, they go and they kill 130,000. And where are the people standing there saying, don't do that? So two things. It's not the only case. Second, what do we do with Eliyahu Navi? Dan is going to explain that to us. Yeah. But third is also that what Michelle said, in those days, many, many centuries ago, ethics and the way justice was seen was completely different.
So I was thinking about, as another moment in the Torah, we have Pinchas, right? And what does Pinchas commits murder? the ultimate zealot act, right? And what does he get for that act? He gets breed shalom. He gets breed shalom. So what does that really mean? That's a very complex answer. No, I'm not going to go into all that now. But the idea that that we as a tradition take people who have moments, who do great things, but also have moments where their greatness is in question. You know, Pinchas is a great person, but it's in question. And the same thing with Elijah. His greatness now becomes in question because of his act in which someone else then Elisha has to take over for him. Now, what does that have to do with Eliyahu HaTishbi and bringing the Mashiach and all of that? I just, if you look at the mythology, I mean, first of all, Elijah is worshipped not only in the Jewish, he's worshipped in the Christian and the Islamic tradition as a miracle worker, as a great person, and so he's one of these people that mysteriously ascends back and forth to heaven, and so he has kind of an inside track to God. So I think perhaps the whole idea that at the end of Havdalah, that's the moment when, there's a tradition that if all Jews in the world celebrate Havdalah 3 Shabbatot, at the end of 3 Shabbatot in a row, the Mashiach will come. So we're waiting for that moment where we're going to have this with Elijah is going to bring the Mashiach. He's actually the one that can do that. And you have this very complex balance. Our whole world has a complex balance between, and it really, this is what I talked about earlier, at the end of Yom Kippur, we have work to do. So the balance, it's the balance of Lashon.
So,
Can I do my closing remarks?
No,
Wow, I
I
sound
just
like
want
a
to phrase a
rabbi.
question before closing remarks.
Go ahead.
Here's my question, and if we could just answer it popcorn style. Not to be shocking, but sometimes the problem with biblical stories is they're so old and they're so remote, they're like wallpaper. They don't land, right? Imagine, like, who's a person in our world who has done what Elijah did, kill the false worshipers? Baruch Goldstein, right? Baruch Goldstein, 25 years ago, goes and kills Muslims in prayer, right? And it would be unimaginable that we would take something that Baruch Goldstein said or did and lift it up to Yom Kippur. But that's actually what we do here. Elijah kills 450 people because they choose a different path. So here's the question that I want to ask you to conclude this, which is, out of this moment of purity, followed by a moment of evil, I'm going to call murder evil, and to channel Elie Wiesel, what's worse than evil is indifference to evil. That's Elie Wiesel. What's worse than evil is indifference to evil. The people who get God and say Adonai Elohim, Adonai Elohim are silent. They do nothing, at least that the Bible tells us about. And we bring that line to this moment, okay? And when you think about the origins of it, what's the lesson for our Yom Kippur Neilah coming up?
So,
if any?
Wes, Elijah doesn't say this line. The people say this line. And I think that's a really important distinction. The people say this line in the face of, and if you want to bring this in face of unspeakable evil, in face of anger that really took Elijah out of this holy space that he was in. Elijah is supposed to be, and in Talmudic teachings, Elijah is the one that can solve all of our problems, that can explain arguments that we can't figure out. And he really doesn't figure this one out, and he really allows his own anger at these people for not listening to him to overwhelm his choices. But the line is not what he says. It's not what he says as he kills them. It's not what he says in the moment. He has nothing to do with that line. The line comes from the people seeing God cause these bullocks and these woods to go up in fire and falling on their face in realization that God is over everything.
But forgive me, Lisa, but it takes time to kill 450 people. It takes time to kill 450 people. And these people were there in the moment, and they do nothing as he's killing 1, 2, 3, 4.
Guys, he took them
people.
away. He took them away to the Wadi Kishon. He doesn't do it in front of the
All
people.
right, can I
Guys,
say something?
I just think this doesn't have integrity to our. to our biblical text, I'm a little worried that we're not being intellectually honest.
Tell me.
Because if you look at our story, I mean, cantors, you can all share, but do we not end our 13 attributes before the real kicker of our 13 attributes?
Yes.
We have these beautiful attributes of God, how God is forgiving and lovely and generous and kind and all these good things. And then the 13 attributes, which we say again and again and again, end before the part of, no, God will not forgive. God will hold you accountable into the generations, right? We do, in the Jewish tradition, have a vengeful God. We have a God who not only has tolerated, you talked about the Purim story, not only tolerated revenge against others, but actually demanded it. When we look at different biblical stories that we have a God who actually asks us to take vengeance against our enemies. And so I don't
But the part of the
think...
13
Can I say
attributes is
something?
Right,
locked off.
can I just say, I don't think that it's fair to say that, you know, like, where did he get this? He's totally off, and this is murder, and this is awful. There is a sense in which, and I think it's problematic in the hugest way, and something that we've been growing past as a religious tradition for many, many, many centuries, but it has taken time for us to grow out of that sense that God's footprint in this world is my way or the highway. And I think that the story that's going to come, where you're ending kind of in that beautiful space, and then you bring up the awful space, but then you don't come to the beautiful space after it, which is that there's this moment of growth for the Jewish people when God says, kind of like at the Akedah that we read on Rosh Hashanah, where God says, actually, no, guys, I don't want that from you. You may have thought, and certainly there was precedent for you to have expected and understood, you know, after the golden calf, we slaughter all these people after the sin of eating all of the, you know, I want the meat, and then we have this horrible plague after Korah, who gets swallowed by the earthquake, with story after story after story after story of a vengeful God, and you might have thought, that's me. Right? Abraham, you might have thought I wanted child sacrifice, but I don't. That's actually not who I am. I need to teach you. We need to grow. God needs to grow. We need to grow. And throughout our history, and I think one of the things that we grapple with on Yom Kippur is how we can follow God's example of growth. And that, yes, we may have been angry, vengeful, sinful, awful at times in our lives, but we can evolve, we can become, and when we say Adonai Hu HaElohim, we actually are saying that God is the God who grows through history, and so too must we.
Can I say something? So I honestly, in general, I love to relate myself with biblical characters who have done wonderful things, but they have flaws as well. Because it's much more relatable as a human being to relate with somebody who failed. Okay, that's one of my learning lessons from today. Second is, I'm going to put some humor here. If you strongly believe that Elijah killed 400 men, he slaughtered them on his own, okay? Wow, he has done weights so much time. I mean, he has such muscles, he can do that 400 times. If you believe that is true, you have to believe that in the way he ended his life on earth is true, with the chariots of fire. I've never seen a chariot on fire in my life. So I don't believe that is true. To be honest with you, I'm sorry, I pray to God all the time, but I don't necessarily believe that all the stories we see in the Bible actually happen.
Okay.
Well, but Elijah is not...
Dan, if you could just end, what do you do? What's the message of this to you? The message of Adonai Elohim coming as it does from this context. What's the message to you in a few hours?
I'm going to actually go with what Michelle said, which is the idea that, you know, that we have to grow. There's a great book, if you haven't read it, it's called God, a Biography, and it really talks about God being a vengeful God, and that eventually changes and is less vengeful. But the model and since we're all created B'Tselem Elohim, that we need to grow as well.
Aliza?
I think I'm sitting with the emotional fervor and the emotional experience that I hope and I pray that when we get to those lines, we can feel the awe for God. We can feel the power of God. We can feel that moment where we all join together. Oh my God, I see, I realize, and bring that clarity into the coming year.
So to me, that's a given. If you've ever been to Neilah, that moment of intensity is a given. It's just so powerful. It's so joyful. There's so much energy. The glow sticks, the children, the repetition, the shofar, the relief that Yom Kippur's over. That intensity and fervor is a given. To me, the cautionary note of this story is that it's just chills and thrills in the moment and of no lasting impact. To me, the cautionary note is it's not enough for religion. It's not enough for your Yom Kippur that you feel good now. It's not enough for religion, not enough for Yom Kippur that you feel inspired now. What matters is what you do tomorrow. What matters is what you do 2 days and 3 days and 2 weeks and 8 weeks and 3 months from now. That's what matters. And what matters, to me, is a cautionary note of all these people had a moment. Having a moment is easy. Having the moment change you is hard. Gemar Chatimat Tiva. We'll see you shortly.
Gavach Chatima Tova.
Baruch Chatima
Gemar
Tova.
Tov.